Hi, everybody. Welcome to Your Life Projectized. Today's episode is number 25, Project Management Simplified, Why Basics Still Rule. Okay, right? So, because we know about the fundamentals in project management, and I feel we don't talk about them enough. But today I have a special guest here who is going to tell us why she feels that the fundamentals are still so very important. And we're going to have a hopefully a very nice discussion about why this is critical in project management. So I'm going to introduce our guest speaker who is very special to me, Mary. I'm Mary. I know you told me to say how to say your last name, and of course I'm going to forget. So, Mary, why don't you introduce yourself and tell the audience a little bit about you?
Yeah, thank you, Pam. Mary Hladio. Currently right now I work for GE Aerospace. I'm what they call a senior productivity leader. It's a little different than most project and program roles I've had in the past. I actually go behind projects and programs and tell them you need to be more efficient. So everyone loves it when I come to their meetings.
Yeah, I bet.
But I've been in aerospace and the banking and the medical device, always in a regulated environment for like the past 30 years. I also own my own consulting business, a speaker, author, and also a vice president of a chapter here in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay, yeah. And I think that's where you and I had met in LA at the Global Summit. And that's when you shared that you are also a chapter leader with PMI, a Western Michigan chapter. So glad to have you on. And again, it is truly an honor to have you.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you for having me.
no, you are so welcome. And so, Mary, one of the things that I wanted to know, right, is you and I, when we've discussed project management, I know you and I have discussed why we both think it is important. Some of the core fundamentals of project management are so critical. So for project managers, even experienced project managers, why do you feel, Mary, that it is so important that project managers sometimes go back to the basics or revisit the basics?
Yeah, what's interesting when I have conversations, especially with other consultants who come in and save projects, right? When we're the knight riding on the white horse with the cape flapping in the background, and we're
Yeah.
coming in to save the day. Uh, Oftentimes, when you ask the questions of, okay, so show me your risk register, show me your work breakdown structure, show me your schedule, and you find they don't even have that, right? And you go, well, let's start there, right? Let's
Yeah.
start with those things. And I don't know why it is. I don't know if it's, especially the more experience you have with a program person. I think some of it's because it's in our head. We think we know, and we're beyond the writing of it down, especially a work breakdown structure.
Yeah.
If this was a couple of weeks ago, right behind me on my whiteboard there, I actually had a work breakdown structure, the old fashioned post-it notes plugged on the wall, and it seemed like double work, but I kept referring back to that as we were doing this project, because sometimes you just really need to see it in front of you. And while there are tools that make that, like Miro and some other tools that make that process easier and more collaborative, if you're talking about having people from around the world to help you, sometimes good old fashioned putting it on the wall is what you need to do. Same thing with the work breakdown helps you with your schedule. Same thing with risk. We're really good at identifying risk. I don't think we're very good at then coming up with the mitigations for those risks, right? Are we going to accept it? Are we going to defer it? Are we going to do something about it? What is even the likelihood of that risk, right? We don't go that step. We go so far as to say there is a risk, and I would even say that oftentimes we're not even really good at the risk statement. Every risk statement should have an impact to either your costs, your schedule, or your resources, right? And we go, there's a risk that the meteor is going to come and stop the project. Okay, great. What would that mean?
Yeah,
Is
now
that a
what?
risk to schedule? Right? And can we do something about it? And is it likely to happen? And if we're going to accept the risk, what do we need to do in case that happens? Right? It's continuing the conversations and things of that nature. Um, and I think in today's world, our problems. I was at a talk recently, probably right at the end of December, and this gentleman is a PhD, and he's doing more business analyst type work, and he says, we're at the point where our problems are so big and so complex that the standard, what we learn So when I got my PMP,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think it was 2008. It was PMBOK version 3. The
Wow.
PMBOK was a third of the size it is today. Today
Yeah.
it's 2 books, right? Agile didn't exist, and I think probably a fourth of my questions were on the ethics of project management. Versus today, you would probably have a fourth, if not a third, of your questions around Agile,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then understanding the difference between Agile and Waterfall. So, but back in the day when we talked about a problem, we would do a root cause and corrective action, right? Well, today there is no root cause. There might be multiple causes, right? The problems are not as simple as let's get in a room and let's solve the problem. We've got current state, future state, and there's a gap. And how do we get there? We have current state and future state, and we've got 6 things that have to occur before we can get to future state. And
Mm-hmm.
knowing that if we change one thing, it impacts the others, right?
Sure.
And so there is no, as simple as let's do this to get to this point. And I think as managers and as project managers, having stronger problem solving skills, having the ability to adapt to change, having the ability to the emotional intelligence today, all these things we kind of forget, right? We're
Yeah.
so stuck on tools and building mural boards and building project schedules and things of that nature that we forget the basics. And you always start with the basics, and that's exactly when something goes wrong, that's the first thing an executive is going to ask you. They're going to ask you for did we identify this risk? Did we know this risk was to happen? Did we understand how this change was going to impact us? Did we understand the problem and what the problem did we understand what we were actually solving? And if we can't say, well, yes, here's my document that identified that, and here's
Mm-hmm.
how we're going to handle it, then you're backpedaling,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, definitely. And and so this is so using so a real world example. So I'm very into fitness, right? And so one of the things that I've noticed even in the fitness industry, right, is folks have all these new gadgets, all these new, all this new workout equipment, and it's all great, right? But if you go back to the basics, right? So before there were all these fancy machines, all these fancy weights, before all that, people so if you think about going back to COVID, right, during COVID when gyms were closed and not everybody had a home gym, a lot of folks, I think, recognized really quickly, hey, you could just go back to the basics, do a home workout, push-ups, jumping jacks, again, the simple things that oftentimes, especially in the fitness world, as folks become advanced, that folks sometimes maybe forget. So,
Yeah,
and so you talked about a few things, Mary. So you mentioned risk analysis, which I absolutely love. And I love the fact that you said, okay, yeah, you jotted a risk, but now what, right? What is the impact of that risk, right? What are the mitigation steps to maybe avoid that risk, or to if that risk becomes an issue, how do you contend with that? But so when thinking about artifacts, right? Going back to artifacts, what are some of your favorite artifacts that for every project, no matter whether it's agile, waterfall, whatever, that in your mind that these are artifacts I must have
yeah,
to plan and execute this project?
yeah. In my past life, we called them PMPs, project management plans, right? Not
Yeah.
schedule. And inside those plans were my charter.
Mm-hmm.
It was a stakeholder register. It was a RACI chart. We identified maybe the top 5 risks in there, and then the plans associated with it. And then we indicated all the other plans that were required with a link to those plans. Like we weren't going to talk all of the communication plans or escalations, but we said we have an escalation process, and here it is, right?
Yeah.
So in that PMP, I start even within our PMI chapter. So when I joined last March, the past president sort of gave me the baton and said, okay, here's what you need to do. And by the way, our big event is in October, and that's what you need to concentrate on. One of the first things I did is I did a project management plan. I created, what's the scope of this event? Who are my stakeholders? What's our budget? It's probably about a 6 or 7 page document. I sent it over to the president. I said, I know this is a very big document. Take your time to read through it. I said, but to me, this is what bounds us, right? And when she read it, she goes, "Oh, this is everything I've been asking for." in the
Yeah.
past. Because I think instead she was listing, a little, it gets heavy when you say, I need 6 things. I need a RACI chart, a stakeholder register, a project management plan, a budget. And you go, oh, that's a lot of documents. But if I say you need a project management plan, a PMP, a project management plan that contains all that, and then you point people to a process that exists. And if it doesn't exist, then you make that process, right? And you have a 5-page document that kind of just summarizes all that, it's a little
Yeah.
easier. And when I've given that plan to people, like, so I just recruited in 2 new program directors underneath me. When we went through it, I say, here's our plan. Here's a project management plan for professional development. And they were like, oh, well, this is great. I get it. Right. And it was something that they know how to go there and go link to it and say, okay, how do we get speakers? Click. How do they go into a process? Here's how we get speakers. How do we book a venue? Click. Here's how we do a venue, because there's a process that's been defined, right? And that doesn't change from project to project. Those processes are there. It's how you're going to go about it, and that's the scope. So for me, I always created a project management plan that contains those elements into it, and then I might go so far, depending on how complex the project is, to then create it, go a little bit step further, right? A stakeholder register with mitigation plans, a communication plan, a a schedule, a work breakdown structure, all that kind of stuff. But at the very least, when I can go to my executive and say, here it is, right? Claims my charter, scope statement, all that kind of good stuff. And that's usually good enough. And oftentimes when you go, you're talking about a real world example. I can't give too much details because it's an active project and it's a military project. But
Sure.
I remember like a project that I was asked to go look in on, just go check it out, right?
Yeah.
And it was supposed to have this huge cost savings effort to us. So I go to the program manager and the engineering project manager, and I say, hey, can you give me an update? My understanding is that you guys are going to have this done by this date. And they're like, oh, yeah, no, we're not going to have that done. It's going to be next year. I'm like, really? Because does anyone know that? Does anyone? Because I think they're kind of counting on this, cost savings. And I said, can you give me an overview? And the guy's like, oh, I guess I can pull some things together. It should never been pulled together. It should have already been together, right? Even if
Absolutely.
it was outdated, he should have been able to give me the Bible, if you will, of his project that says, here's the scope, here's what we're doing, and then tell me why you're late, right? And there were some really simple reasons why you're late. Cost saving projects, when it comes to delivery, safety, and quality, those always take precedent over cost savings projects.
Oh,
Even though
absolutely.
every executive wants cost savings, if I got to get something out the door, or there's a quality issue, or there's a safety issue, then everything rallies around that, right? Especially
Absolutely.
like safety and quality. Everything that even beats out delivery, right? But if it's about putting resources to make sure the customer gets what they want, the cost saving is for us, right? That customer doesn't necessarily see that. So, but I should already have that together. And then you tell me, okay, here's what happened. And his first delay, by the way, there's 3 delays. His first delay was legit. Like, he was told to go by an executive to go focus somewhere else. He didn't resources right away. They hadn't done a make buy analysis. They hadn't done a comment. I was like, okay, I get it. So we readjust it. We said, okay, I offer my recommendation. Off to the races they go. They delayed again. And I even said, you might want to put together just sort of a, scope statement, overview document that you could just, PowerPoint, whatever, that you can give to anybody who asks a question. They can understand what's going on. And so I kind of put one together for myself. I go, work another project, come back. There's someone say, hey, whatever happened to that one project? Says, I don't know. I'm not on the team, but let me go back and look. Another delay, right? Yeah, I remember when we said it was going to be this year. Yeah, it's not. It's going to be next year. I'm like, another year delay. And some of that has to do with lead times of parts. I said, what happened this time? So, well, we really didn't understand how to do a make the analysis. I said, did you raise your hand? Who did you tell? That sort of thing. And so I said, well, now there's new executives that have come in. There's new other leaders on the team that have come in. Did you ever create that project management plan? No. Did you ever create the overview document? No. All right, well, here, I actually did one. They're like, oh, great. I said, you just need to update it with the current delay, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so it's like, we even though he knew in his head to explain it, I had to bring him in, and to bring him in, just so you know, like that takes him away from something else. To go in front of executives, it's a non-productive time, right? To go in front of executives and then say, here's what happened on my project and why we're delayed and why you're not going to see the savings. Versus if he got in front of it, I'm not pulling you away. You could just say, hey, we've got this problem. Yeah, I can go here. What do you want to do? And people would have made a decision, and that decision would have been documented, and you wouldn't have to have any problems, right? So it's those basics, like, just documenting issues. I used to have a boss that said, bad news doesn't age well, right? So the
Hmm.
longer you wait to explain that there's a problem, even if you say, okay, well, I told my boss, well, and if that person doesn't raise it up to the right levels, um, when you finally get to the point where you're in front of executive, because at that point it's no bueno, right? And they go, okay, so what happened? And now you got to go back in history and explain and peel away all the layers, and they're going to have even more questions, and eventually they're going to say, well, when did you raise the alarm? And then if you can't answer that question, it's not a good thing. I would not want to be in that position.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so even so, just even thinking about your example just now, so I'm now wondering, what prevented maybe that a project manager from sounding the alarm or from telling the executives that they see a problem. And I think a lot of times some project managers are fearful of what the executives are going to say and that they will be blamed. Okay, to your point that okay, if you knew that this was going awry 4 months ago,
Right.
why did you wait 4 months to present this to us and tell us that there was a problem?
Yeah.
So,
And I think, to be fair, I mean, the executives have a right to ask those questions. That's why they're
yeah,
there.
sure,
But
yeah,
we shouldn't be fearful. No one lost their job. They're 2 years behind schedule. No one's lost their job. Matter of fact,
yeah,
one person actually got promoted, right? But, I think once we explained the circumstances around it, they understood.
yeah,
Now, this year, delay, they have now have a third delay. This might, there's probably going to be some a little bit more scrutiny on this one. Because now you're on your third year, you're kind of running out of excuses. We're at the tail end, and then we're finding out that there were things that may or may not have been done. Or we didn't account for certain time frames or lead times. There's a lot. It's a death by a thousand cuts. But even and so our leadership team, started asking questions, and I think people's feelings got hurt. And I said, look, I'm not. This is not. I'm not blame game. We're going to ask some tough questions. And by the way, you can either answer me or you can answer our general manager. And those are two very different conversations.
sure,
Right?
sure. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah. But
absolutely.
I think there's some of it's a fear, some of it's culture, right? So if you think about the Toyota production system, and everyone has studied it, there's been books on it and that sort of thing. They have what they call the andon cord. And the andon cord, if there's a problem on the line, any operator, any manager, anybody can go and pull on an andon cord and it stops the line, right? Now,
Yeah,
when you're Toyota and you're pumping out hundreds of cars a day and you stop the line, you better believe everyone comes out of their offices, they go down and they figure out the problem, they solve the problem to try to get that line back moving again, right?
yeah.
Or they switch it out or take that unit off and then put something else on and whatever else they fix the problem. But no one ever says, why in the world did you pull that andon cord? No, they're expected to pull the andon cord because the consequences of not putting the andon cord means issues much further down the line that are harder to deal with and have bigger consequences than in that moment, right? And I think part of it's a culture that it's okay to raise the alarm. And I think that's the difference between being a project manager and being a project leader,
Oh, I
right?
love that. Yeah.
Project managers are managing the day to day of their project. And then we wonder why we don't get promoted or we can't get the program manager job or we can't get the director of program job. If you want a seat at the table, then you need to think differently. And that means you don't shy away from bad news, right? So we've got a meeting next Wednesday, and we've got 2 meetings set up to talk about why this particular project is off kilter and what we're doing so it's not just to say, hey, guess what? It's off schedule again. It's off schedule, and here's what we're going to do. We can't recover the time, but here's how we got here. Here's the resources we need. Here are the risks that we have. We've gone through already a couple different sessions to talk through it. I've taken one of my folks and put them on there. I always tell them, I said, your job is to darken doorsteps, right? Like if someone's not answering you, you go stand at their desk until you get your answer, right? They should see the shadow looming on them when you walk in their door. And so, that's what he's doing. He's pushing it forward. And we didn't have that. We thought programs can handle it, and they didn't. And it is what it is. We can do lessons learned later, but right now we got to get this thing done, because it's not just a cost saving project. Because we thought we were so close, they've written into their contract
Oh my gosh.
expected savings, and now it's impacting margin, right?
Sure.
So, and I had to say that out loud to some of the engineers, because I don't think that's a disconnect, right? That they didn't understand that, oh yeah, it's a delay. It's just a couple of weeks. No, a couple of weeks it's a big deal, because you do a couple
Absolutely.
of weeks and you do a couple of weeks and someone else does a month and someone else does a day, and that all piles up, and next you know we're 6 months delayed,
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely. And especially if you're thinking about all the dependencies, right, that are also affected. So and all those dependencies that are now going to be delayed, that
Right.
are so yeah, that's amazing. And I know you can't say much. I'm so curious though. I want to ask so many questions about this project, but that is such a great real world example. And
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. And so, Mary, so also I know you have a lot of experience in AI. I know, again, I feel like that's your bread and butter, to a
Bread and butter. I tell myself that I'm really curious. I forget how I say it, but like I'm an AI advocate, and I think we talked about the basics of project management. This is where AI can help, right?
okay.
So, and it depends. Every company's a little different. We have an internal tool that we use that's based off a very popular platform, but it does not have all the capabilities of the platform, because what a lot of people don't know, you have an underlying piece of software, and then you have an API that sits on top of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the API is out open to the world, and when you're dealing with some of the sensitive information we're dealing with, we can't have it potentially scrape off information and be used somewhere else. So it's protected behind our firewall, but there's still things we can do with it. And so oftentimes people will call me like, I want to be able to do this. Well, you can do that. It's maybe a couple extra steps you're going to do, but you can get there. And then now that some of our integrations that we're doing, I think in the next 6 months, we might be a little behind the curve when it comes to everybody else, but there's going to be some other things we do. But things like meeting minutes. Everyone hates meeting minutes, right? And the call I was on earlier, it was a technical call. We've had two other project managers on it, and I was sort of at the program level, and I was using our budget to help this thing along, but I really wasn't involved. And every time they talk, it just kind of goes over my head.
Yeah.
But we've lost two people. One person was a rotational, and we thought we can get it done in a year, and it couldn't get done, and they moved on to someplace else. Put another person on, that something happened to that person, they left the organization. And so when the exec came to me and says, well, who's going to run this? I said, I guess it's going to be me, right? So we're on the call, and they lost me almost immediately, right? And as they're talking, but I don't need to know the details. As they're talking back and forth, as long as the right people were in the room, and we started creating action plans, right? And I knew enough that was going on. I said, okay, so we think we've come up with a potential solution. We've got some things. What are our actions, right? I've had that meeting recorded. I can take that transcript, throw it into the AI tool, and say, summarize this meeting, and give me all the actions, and who's doing them, and the due dates that they said they were going to do. And within a few clicks, maybe 10 minutes, that's done for me in a meeting minute format. And I could take that, email it out to everybody and said, review it. I would say review anything you get from any AI tool, review it, make sure that everything is sufficient to what you like, and all the spellings are correct and that sort of thing, and then send it out and it's done, right? Most people don't do that. There's a PMI for West Michigan. I'm on a committee helping out one of our VPs of academic outreach. And for a while there, he had a person doing his meeting minutes, and she did a fantastic job, right? And like the meeting was at 5, and by 6:30 or something, you had the meeting minutes, or maybe by the next day. I think she's still around, but for whatever reason, I think we're beyond that. We're at the action, here are all the actions. So she's not really taking meeting minutes. We finally
Mm-hmm.
have launched, and now it's just like things are just progressing. And someone recently said, I haven't seen meeting minutes in about a month. I'm like, we really haven't had any. So I started using, I a tool that I use that I can't use at work, but I can use on my own self that I wouldn't call it a transcript tool. They refer to themselves instead of generative AI, which is what most people think of when we think about Claude and in ChatGPT and Copilot. It's agentic AI and agentic AI, and you'll see this a lot on LinkedIn where people start talking about having an AI agent, right? And recently, the CEO of NVIDIA said at some point in time, IT departments are going to be the HR of these AI agents, right? Where we say, go do this task, and they go off and do it, right? So this is
Mm-hmm.
where AI shines in project management. Go look at all my risks that have been identified. And if we've done a really good job, all the risks identified, all of the likelihoods, all the mitigations, and determine what my gaps are and what should I be paying attention to next based on where I am at in the project, right? I could do that. It'll probably take me several days to go through and match them all up. But the nice thing about machine language types tools is I give it a bunch of stuff, and the more you use it, the more it learns from you. So here you go and come back and do that. That's like having a project assistant that does, you don't have to pay, you don't have to feed pizza, you don't have to give it coffee, right? It's just there in the background. And I've given some tools some really complex problems, and
Yeah,
it'll come back and say, I'm going to need a minute to look at this, right? It's not going to be instantaneous. And it's like, okay, you run, I'll come back tomorrow and see where you're at, right? And then it has an answer for me. So I think, there was a fear, I think, for a lot of people for a while that AI was going to take away jobs. No, we're still going to
no,
need a human being. Um, but this is going to, when we talked about project managers to project leaders, this is going to help you be at the table, because no longer are you reporting the news. You're actually saying, here is what's happening, and here's our solution, right?
absolutely.
And we've looked at our top 5 risks. I think we can burn off these two. We're at a point in the project that we no longer think these risks are valid. So we're going to archive them. We're not going to delete them. We're going to archive them, but we're definitely going to move them on the list. But now there's 2 more risks now that we're at the middle of the project that we're bringing up to the forefront, right? And so, that's your AI doing on analysis for you. You don't have to do that analysis, right? Look at your resource management on your schedule and say, are there people on my team that are overloaded with tasks? And is there
Mm-hmm.
anyone that has the skill sets that I need that I could possibly take on some lesser tasks and give them to that? You can manually do that and figure it out. And based on your knowledge of those people on your team, and we don't always know our teams very well. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we do, but oftentimes in big organizations, you go to engineering, they just give you an engineer. I don't, hopefully that engineer knows what he's doing. I mean, he got a degree, he got a job, right?
Yeah.
But do I know everything about that engineer? And for the AI says, well, you have an electrical engineer and a mechanical engineer. Could you take these requirements, put this to this person, and then it offloads your mechanical engineer to go do these things and let your electrical engineer do the calculations? And you're like, yeah, I probably could do that, right? This is where AI shines, is things like that.
I couldn't agree more. And so I love the fact that you had mentioned the risk. Again, going back to the risk. So because that's exactly what I do. So I create a robust risk register using ChatGPT. And so like I will put in so if I'm working on, let's say, a software development project, and I will say to ChatGPT, these are some of the risks. So without giving it too much information, right? Because that's open AI. So I'm also
Right.
very sensitive about how much I feed ChatGPT. But I will say this is a project that I'm working on. These are the risks that I've logged thus far. These are lessons learned from a previous software development project that was similar in nature.
Yeah.
What risks am I overlooking, and what is the potential impact of those risks, and how can I then mitigate them? And
Yes.
I'm telling you, it is me. And like you said, right, it saves me so much. I guess if I had done that myself, gone through my lessons learned and spent the time to really create a robust artifact. I know it would have taken me a while. Maybe it would take me a day, maybe it would take me a little bit longer, but Chat GPT, I mean, not even a minute. And I
Right.
have this robust risk register. So I love that you mentioned that. And so so I wanted to ask you also something about one of yours, to kind of switching topics a little bit from AI. So you're an author, all right, and you'd written a book called Penny's Treehouse Triumph. So
Yes.
so I love that. I love when we spoke about it. I was so inspired by you. But I'd love to know what inspired you to write that book, number one. And then how do you think we can introduce project management concepts to younger generations?
Yes, absolutely. So, believe it or not, my goddaughter is the inspiration behind that. And it's actually turned into a little bit of a family project. But she went to space camp last summer, and her mom has some health issues. So I went with them to space camp. And we were sitting there looking, or I was like on my phone or something like that. And there was somebody that I know in the aerospace industry who just came back from maternity leave, and she said that she had received this little package from her her work family, and it had a onesie and a baby beanie and a sippy cup and an adult sippy cup,
Yeah.
and behind there was a book, and it says, "I want to be an engineer." Right now, my friend is an engineer, and I was like, why is it that there's books about being lawyers and astronauts and being a doctor and being an engineer? I've never seen a book about project management. And from the back, my 11-year-old goddaughter says, then you should write one. Right. And I was like, well done, kid. You're right. I should.
I
so, so I did. So I was like, okay, well, what would we talk about? And then I have a family full of preachers and teachers. I say we have a lot of preachers, a lot of teachers. And my aunt is a PhD in education. She's retired now. And I was telling her that I was writing this children's book, and I told her the age range that I wanted to do. I wanted the age range that the kids could get the concept of a project, the basics of a project, and could possibly even do a project, right? And so then she came back and says, "Oh, you know what you could do at the back of the book? You could ask questions about what happened in the story, and possibly even say, here's you can go download a plan and build a birdhouse, or do whatever, that they could actually do their own little project, right?" And I said, oh, that's interesting. So we started writing questions that we could ask, that a teacher or a parent could do to help it make it more educational. And then so far, and then my sister-in-law, she's doing the illustrations. My niece is actually doing the graphic designs. So it's become like this little family project. And I think for younger generations, I think what happens when I mentor people, like in the college age and up, and they're ready to do that PMP application, or a CAPM, whatever it is, and they say, "Oh, I don't have the skills," or I didn't have the hours." Sure, you do. What's the definition of a project, right? And when you talk about the definition of project, that it's any activity with a definite beginning and a definite end, then we've all done projects in our life, right?
hmm
Planning a vacation, a garage sale, the bake sale at the school, whatever it might be. These are all technically projects, and they're by definition, right? It's only something like driving to work, where it's an operation, where it's a repetitive action, and we know the best way to avoid traffic, and we know where the coffee house is on the way in, how much time it takes us. We leave the door now, and I get my coffee, and I get on the 101, and I'm going to make it to wherever I need to get to, right? That's an operation, because there's a consistency to it. But if something like a bake sale, we don't know how that might go, or garage sale, we don't know how that goes. We have to plan that, right? So it's giving people, like, it may not have been called a project. You may not have had a title called project manager or project coordinator or project assistant, or whatever you want to call it, but you've done projects in your life, right?
Absolutely.
And you can show them that. And I think if you can show kids at an early age that, and regardless of your major, I mean, we do a competition in West Michigan, and most of the people, I think we only have one school in the state in all of Michigan. We only have one school that has a degree in project management. But my little marketing class that I'm doing one with now, they do marketing, does projects. Every client they have is a project, right?
Yeah.
The engineers are doing projects. The business schools, they're doing projects. And so having them see that the basics of understanding your stakeholders, creating the scope statement, creating the budget, creating your communication plan, all these things are project management tools that are in the toolbox that you could apply to almost anything. And if we can teach them at a younger age about that, and learning it, and it's only going to help them find that job, and it gives them the edge. There's a gentleman who just recently was laid off, and he reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I want to get my PMP." Now he's probably in his 60s. And so I said, okay. So I'm giving him some information. He went to one of our ATPs. He started taking classes. I checked in with him. How's it going? He goes, Mary, I don't use Agile. I've never used Agile. I know nothing about Agile. And I said, I believe in you. You can do this, right? What if we introduce those concepts early, even if he didn't know it? I mean, once I explain what Agile is, he's like, oh, okay, I get it. It's keeping up with those skill sets. And the earlier you can bring those skill sets, then because he's looking for jobs and they're all asking for PMPs. And here he is 60 years old and he doesn't have a PMP. He could have gotten that back in his 20s. And he still, I don't know Agile. I don't do Agile projects. But because I have a PMP, it says I know enough about the fundamentals of a project that, and even my current role, which isn't necessarily project management, but it's enough of a project that, and the guy who hired me says, you're a project manager and you've been a program manager and you know enough to help get these projects going, even though we're not calling it project management, right? So the younger we can teach the kids that, and I think it's valuable skill sets that when they get to, especially the younger kids, if they can get them at, say the junior high age range, when they get to high school, that's what they're doing. They're doing projects, right? They're
Exactly.
class projects, and that's going to help them when they get to college, and that's going to help them when they get out in the real world. And if they can start to realize that they take notes of these things, and they can put that on their resume.
Exactly, exactly. And every time I give a talk, right? So I'm a keynote speaker, I'm a speaker as well. And every time I give a talk, that's one of the things that I say often that, when I was a little kid, and I know a lot of us, we probably dreamed of, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be this. I said, I bet none of us raised our hand and said, oh, I want to be a project manager.
Yeah,
But why not? Why not
right.
be a project manager? And to your point, yes, everything we do, we all of us, and I've heard the same from a lot of people who I've said, "Oh, you should go for your PMP, get your and I've said this to several friends, and they've said, "No, well, I don't really have any project management experience." I'm like, "But no, you do have
You
project
do.
management experience. Think about all the different things you've done at your various jobs
Yeah,
that are projects. They have a beginning and an end, and you produced a service or a product." And that is actually what inspired the name of this podcast, Your Life Projectized, for
right.
that exact reason. So I love that you put together that book, and I'm so grateful for it because you are going to help so many people, children, maybe choose a career path that is maybe not traditional. Again,
Right.
not the doctors, the engineers, the lawyers, but
And that's not to say we don't need them, but I mean, if the PMI report that came out, I think it was last year, that I think it's something like 30 million worldwide. There are 30 million project and program managers needed it by, I think, the year 2030.
yeah,
There's
I
an
saw
article
that.
out there. I'm misquoting it, but it's a lot. It's a big number that's needed in a very short period of time. And,
Exactly.
because that's the world, as much as we don't romanticize the profession of project management, I think the world needs project managers. And as soon as something goes wrong, guess who's coming in to save the day? They might not have the title, but it's someone who's going to sit down and organize the chaos, breakdown structure, create the schedule. Let's look at the risks. Let's do an escalation plan. Let's do all these other things. That's what they're doing. They may call it
Exactly.
whatever they want to put a title on it,
Exactly.
but ultimately that's what they're doing.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. And so, Mary, this has been such a great discussion. It's such a great discussion. And again, I love the concept of going back to the basics. And especially, right, because I know PMI just announced, I believe on January 5th, their partnership with Agile Alliance. So I know we are going to
Right.
be seeing a lot more Agile. And this is not to say we can't still use the basics when we are introducing Agile into our
Yeah.
teams, because you're still going to need, right, the charter, your
Right.
risk analysis, your project management plan, your
Yep.
communication management plan, etc. So I love that.
Well, and I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a lot more hybrid projects.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think when we're at the planning and initiating phases of our projects, waterfall or the traditional project management process works really well.
yeah,
At the end of our projects, when we're at all right, it's done, it's executed, we're done, and now we're just sort of like closing up and lessons learned, we're going to go back to your traditional approach. But in the middle, doing the sprints or the scrums, the language is starting to beyond just software. The language is starting to actually come up more and more. Yesterday, I was on a call and someone said, "Hey, we've got all these little projects going on for the same product line. What if we did a blitz and did some sprints and we all attacked the problem at the same time?" Right? That's agile.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
agile. They didn't say it, but that is agile. So I think so I think we're going to see a lot more of that hybrid where we do portions. We take the goodness of waterfall, we take the goodness of agile, and we put it together. And I think that's going to come up more and more often. As a matter of fact, I was actually been trying to work with a couple of people to develop a workshop around that, to talk about that, just to say it's not either or. And it used to be either or. It's no longer either or. It's going to be both.
And I agree with you. I think a lot of the projects I've worked on thus far, or as of late, they have definitely been more of a hybrid approach where yeah, you have the structure of waterfall, but then you also have the flexibility of agile. So that which and I absolutely love that we're going in that direction.
Yeah.
And so I know we're getting to the end of our time, and so there's one question that I ask each one of my guests before
Okay.
we end, and that is. When you were a little girl, since I'm sure you did not say, I want to grow up to be a project manager. When you were a little girl, Mary, what did you envision yourself doing as a career?
I yeah, I wanted to be a chef. My grandfather was a chef. I wanted to be a chef. Even today, I do a lot of cooking. That's how I get people to come show up to my meetings. Is I I bake cookies and things of that nature. That way when they see me, they're going, "Well, she's coming to cut our budget, but at least she brought cookies."
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and even the story, Penny's Treehouse, I remember I didn't want to build a treehouse. I wanted to build a restaurant. And I was going to build it in the tree in my backyard. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And my dad wasn't very mechanical, but I got some, one of our neighbors down the road was in construction. So he always left over like wood. So we took some plywoods and 2x4s and my friends, and we were trying to build this restaurant.
Yeah,
Um, in our tree, our tree house is going to be a restaurant.
yeah.
Uh, and I was going to sell like lemonade cookie and have a secret password, the whole thing. But yeah, as a kid, I possibly, and even today, like even when I met my husband, we talked about, we used to have like 5 restaurants we used to go to constantly. I said, oh, wouldn't it be really great if we created a restaurant? And it was like the best things of all 5 restaurants, right?
Yeah.
Like the egg rolls from here, but the so and so from here, and the what was in there, and do that and call it my favorite things or something like that. So I think even today, I still think about that. Like if money was no object and I had to do it over again, it would probably end up being a chef.
I love that. Yeah, I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. So my father's an executive chef. So my
Oh,
whole
really?
life, yeah.
Yeah,
So from as long as he's been a chef, gosh. So he started off as a chef in Scotland, and then he's now owned 2 restaurants in New Jersey. Now works as an executive chef for another restaurant there. But so cooking in our whole, so I can appreciate this very much because our whole family cooks.
yeah,
We're all. And I don't know how, but we're all pretty decent cooks.
yeah.
Actually, I think I'm a really good cook, but yeah, we're so I love that. I love that.
Yeah, my brothers cook. All of us, my except for my dad. My dad never cooked, but that he wasn't his thing. My it was my mom's father, and I remember going to go visit, and we were never allowed in the kitchen. In the chef's kitchen, you never go in. He might let you stand on the side and stir or do whatever. But the one thing I appreciated about him is he broke it down what he
Yeah.
was doing, right? And again, there's a little bit of project management in there. There's also a little science in there. Like, why are we using butter? Are we using butter for taste or are we using butter to bind? Right. And if we're using butter to bind and we don't care necessarily to get the buttery taste, then are there other materials that we could use to bind some dough if you ran out of butter? Right. And some of those lessons I still remember. And there's a lady who I used to bake and she used to come in. She goes, oh, this is fantastic. What did you do? Can I have the recipe? I said, sure, here's a recipe. Oh, by the way, I didn't do this. I did this instead. I didn't do this. I did this. She goes, why can't you ever give me a recipe straightforward without all your notes, everything you did? I said, because at some point in time, it's like, I wonder why they're doing that. I wouldn't put this in there. I want a more fudgy taste. And once you understand how to get something to be fudgier or thicker or whatever, you know what to add or take away to get that consistency you want.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're following the recipe as is, and you're taking someone else's word for it. That's the way you want to do it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I rarely ever do I follow a recipe to the T.
I will say I'm this exact same way. I'm the exact same way, and which is funny because absolutely that's project management, and that's again the hybrid approach. That's the structure of waterfall, and then the
Yeah,
flexibility and adaptability of agile. So I
yeah.
love that.
I'll give you one other quick story. We don't go out for New Year's Eve anymore. We're just getting too old for the crowds and the craziness. I'd rather be home and have my bottle of wine and my champagne and whatever. And so I started creating this gourmet meal. It's a Chateaubriand with Chateau potatoes, it's a grilled asparagus, a grilled lobster tail, and usually a flourless cake, molten lava cake. And if you go back to when I started this, I've probably been doing it for about 10 years, it was like I was running around crazy trying to get everything done, everything come back, and the potatoes would be overdone, and the steak would be underdone, and all this kind of stuff. And the this year, it's like okay, I knew what I needed to do. I need to, do the potatoes. I need to cut them here. I need to do this here. I need to have this mixed and ready to go. Because everything was at a different temperature, and it's not going to take long for the lobster tails to grill, and I don't need very long, to grill the asparagus. And so it got to the point where I wasn't as stressed this year, and I was like, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I had broke it down to its basic elements, and I knew exactly how I needed to cook the meal. And so when it was time to do dinner, or I told my husband dinner's ready, he goes, wow. He goes, that's probably one of the first times that you weren't like running around the house
Yeah.
with 16 bowls in the kitchen. Oh, the kitchen's like a complete mess, for this beautiful dinner. I said, yeah, I'm starting to get the hang of it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it was like, it's like I applied those project management skills. It's okay, I lessons learned, right? And what do I need to do? And when do I need to get started? And I can start certain things way ahead of dinner and have them prepped, ready to go. So that when it came down to dinner, it was like boom, 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 done. Right.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. I love that. I love that. And great examples, great examples. Again, I loved how you, the real world application of project management. I
yeah,
absolutely love that. So,
yeah.
Mary, thank you so very
Thank
much
you.
no, this has been great. I appreciate you so very much. And I think our audience is going to get so much value from hearing your insights. So, thank you
Yes.
again.
Thank you. You have a good day.
Okay.
Have a good weekend.
You as well. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.